A magnate froze mid-stride on a bustling Manhattan avenue. The woman offering blossoms on the street corner was the very same nurse who had clasped his dying spouse's hand 2 years prior. She was the solitary soul who had remained through the anguish, the stillness, and the final exhalation. He offered no currency. He did not summon his chauffeur. He did not continue his journey. He performed the one action no one could have foreseen, an act that would unveil a clandestine revelation his departing wife had confided to that nurse in her closing moments, a message intended solely for him. This missive had languished for 730 days, awaiting its delivery, poised to irrevocably alter both their existences in ways neither was prepared to confront. 54-year-old Darnell Okafor resided on the 38th floor of a magnificent limestone edifice gracing Manhattan's Upper East Side. Expansive windows, stretching from floor to ceiling, adorned every wall, framing Central Park as if it were an unsolicited masterpiece. His art collection alone commanded a valuation of $3.4 million, encompassing sculptures originating from Lagos, oil paintings procured from a Chelsea gallery that Camille had adored, and a handcrafted wooden effigy from his matriarch's ancestral hamlet in Anambra State, displayed above the hearth like a silent sentinel overseeing a fortune forged from nothing. The grand dining expanse accommodated 10 individuals, yet only one seat was ever occupied, and it was not his. It was Camille's place setting. Positioned second from the end on the left, subtly angled towards the window, a habit born from her fondness for observing the shifting light across the park during meals. No one else claimed it. No one dared reposition it. The housekeeper meticulously attended to it every Tuesday and Thursday, exercising extreme caution to disturb its placement by not even a fraction of an inch. Darnell Okafor stood as the originator and chief executive of Okafor Venture Holdings, a sprawling conglomerate specializing in real estate and sustainable energy, appraised at a staggering $9.2 billion. He had meticulously constructed this empire, commencing from a humble one-bedroom dwelling in West Baltimore, equipped with a borrowed laptop and a strategic blueprint scrawled on the reverse of a church pamphlet. 30 years hence, he commanded commercial estates across 14 metropolitan centers, vast solar installations spanning 3 states, and a development portfolio that had dramatically redefined urban landscapes. His timepiece bore a price tag of $47,000. His attire, impeccably tailored in Milan, bespoke an elevated standard. His name graced prestigious Forbes rankings, featured at charitable galas, and was inscribed upon the donor recognition walls of 3 academic institutions. Yet, none of these accomplishments held sway. Each morning, precisely at 6:15, Darnell would traverse 2 city blocks to a favored coffee establishment on Lexington Avenue. His order remained constant: an oat milk latte, an additional shot, and a dusting of cinnamon on top, totaling $6.75. He would then convey this beverage back to his opulent residence, carefully placing it on the nightstand positioned on the left side of the bed, Camille's accustomed space. He would observe the ethereal tendrils of steam ascend, swirl, and dissipate. He would patiently await its complete cooling before discreetly emptying its contents into the bathroom sink. This ritual persisted without deviation for 730 consecutive mornings. He never consumed the beverage. He never omitted the act. It represented the sole remaining practice that offered a semblance of coherence, the solitary thread connecting his physical actions to a tangible echo of her presence. Camille Okafor had succumbed to her illness 2 years prior. Ovarian cancer advanced to its 4th stage by the time it was detected. 7 months elapsed from diagnosis to her final breath. 7 months of therapeutic interventions that offered grand promises but yielded no solace. 7 months of witnessing the sharpest, most vibrant, and most spirited woman he had ever known transform into a shadow of her former self, almost unrecognizable. Prior to her affliction, she had dedicated herself as a pediatric speech therapist, working with children who struggled to articulate words, who harbored entire universes trapped behind clenched jaws and silent tongues. She possessed an extraordinary capacity for patience, for waiting, and for nurturing the conviction that unspoken thoughts would ultimately find their voice. Darnell, in contrast, lacked these particular virtues. He possessed swiftness, strategic acumen, and an innate ability to gauge a situation, finalize agreements, and immediately transition to the next undertaking before the ink on the previous contract had even dried. This particular skill had been instrumental in constructing his vast enterprise. However, it had also been the reason he found himself confined to a boardroom on the most devastating night of his life. Camille had imparted something to him, nearing the end, something of profound significance. He could sense its intangible form within his memory, its weight pressing against the interior of his skull, akin to a word poised on the verge of utterance. Yet, the precise words themselves had vanished, blurred into an indistinct haze, much like a melody playing in a room from which he had locked himself out and subsequently misplaced the key. He would attempt to recall them during the nocturnal hours, lying in the oppressive darkness on his solitary side of the bed, gazing at the vacant expanse where she had once slumbered. Grief, however, possessed a cruel tendency to obliterate the very things one desperately needed, leaving behind only the fragments one yearned to forget. He vividly recalled the final contract he had reviewed that fateful night, a substantial acquisition valued at $780 million. He remembered the tactile sensation of the pen in his hand, the precise shade of the ink, and the minute grain of the polished mahogany conference table where he had been seated while his wife lay dying 11 miles distant. He, however, could not recall the countenance of the woman who had tenderly held Camille's hand as she drew her last breath. He knew with absolute certainty that someone had been present. A nurse. He had arrived at the medical facility too late, bursting through the doorway of her chamber, only to find Camille already quiescent, already departed, already enshrouded in white. In the corridor just beyond, a figure sat upon a utilitarian plastic chair, head bowed, her shoulders convulsing with silent tremors. A nurse, attired in creased medical attire, who had evidently been weeping for an extended duration. Darnell had walked past her without pause. He had not halted. He had not inquired about her name. He had not offered a simple expression of gratitude. He had proceeded directly into the room, stood over his wife's still form, and a chilling realization had dawned. He had bartered the final hours of her existence for a signature on a document. 2 years later, that nurse's face remained an enigma. He had committed the details of the final contract he had executed that night to memory, down to the specific clause numbers, but the woman who had remained when he did not, the woman who had cradled Camille's hand to spare her the solitude of her demise, was a mere phantom, an unnamed spectre. This profound failure haunted him more acutely than the pervasive grief itself. 2 years prior to that fateful moment, the encounter on the Manhattan sidewalk had irrevocably altered the trajectory of his existence. Camille Okafor was nearing the end of her life on the 7th floor of Mount Sinai Hospital in room 714, a private suite costing $3,800 per night. Fresh floral arrangements were delivered each morning by a service Darnell had commissioned, a measure taken because Camille had once voiced her profound dislike for the sterile aroma of medical facilities. White peonies and lavender perpetually, white peonies and lavender. The room offered a commanding vista of the East River. A flat-screen television was mounted on the wall, a device Camille had never once engaged. In the corner stood a reclining chair intended for Darnell's repose, though he rarely utilized it. And there was the narrow hospital bed, its rails capable of elevation and descent, where a woman who had once joyfully danced barefoot in her kitchen to the melodies of Stevie Wonder now lay tethered to intravenous morphine drips and a labyrinth of monitoring wires. The relentless cancer had metastasized, affecting her liver, lungs, and lymph nodes. The medical professionals communicated in carefully chosen language, words designed to soften the unyielding reality. Camille, with her inherent keen intellect, recognized that she possessed a superior understanding of her condition than those within the room. The nursing staff operated on rotating shifts, 4 hours on duty followed by 4 hours of respite. However, as Camille entered her terminal weeks, these rotations grew increasingly sparse. The agonizing cries would erupt during the nocturnal hours, emanating from a depth of pain so profound that even potent morphine could only blunt its sharpest edges. She would cry out for extended periods, her body arching against sheets saturated with perspiration, imploring Darnell, calling for her mother, who had been deceased for 11 years, pleading with anyone who would listen. One by one, the nurses sought transfers to different assignments. This was not an act of indifference, but rather a primal instinct for self-preservation. Witnessing a person succumb slowly, audibly, and with such profound suffering, it eroded something fundamental within those who stood closest to the ordeal. By the final week, only one nurse remained steadfast: Jolene Baptist, age 32. Born in Port-au-Prince and nurtured in the vibrant neighborhood of Flatbush, Brooklyn, she was a devoted single mother to her 6-year-old son, Nico, who resided with her mother, Marie, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in East New York. Jolene had been a registered nurse for 9 years. She worked the night shifts primarily because the enhanced pay differential helped offset the significant cost of childcare. She readily accepted the shifts that others shunned, driven by the financial necessity that precluded her from declining opportunities. However, her continued presence by Camille's side stemmed from a deeper conviction. She could not bear to abandon a fellow human being to face death alone. On those nights when Camille's agony reached its zenith and she screamed until her voice was utterly spent, Jolene would sit on the edge of the bed, gently grasp Camille's hand, and softly sing Creole lullabies, melodies her grandmother had imparted to her in a humble kitchen in Haiti. These songs spoke of the vast ocean, the celestial moon, and children enveloped in love, even when the world around them seemed steeped in darkness. She would meticulously braid Camille's thinning hair when sleep proved elusive, her gentle fingers carefully navigating strands rendered fragile and brittle by the arduous treatments. And she would converse, sharing anecdotes about Nico, about his aspiration to become a physician, about his earnest practice sessions of administering checkups to his plush companions with a toy stethoscope discovered at a thrift store, about the time he had declared with absolute sincerity, "Mama, when I grow up, I am going to mend everyone." Camille had responded with a faint laugh, the last she would ever utter. In the ultimate hour, the rhythmic beeping of the medical monitors began to decelerate. Jolene recognized the progression, having witnessed it before, the gradual surrender of the body in discernible stages, much like a grand mansion extinguishing its interior lights room by room. Camille's eyes fluttered open. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, was parched and cracked, yet each word was articulated with deliberate precision, chosen with the discernment of a soul aware that these were her final pronouncements. Jolene leaned closer, her attention fully engrossed. She listened intently. She offered a subtle nod. Tears traced paths down her cheeks, falling onto the sterile hospital blanket. She never divulged the specifics of Camille's whispered words to anyone. Not the physicians, not her fellow nurses, and certainly not to Darnell, who remained 11 miles away in a glass-enclosed conference room, pen poised, finalizing a $780 million acquisition while his wife breathed her dying sentiments to a stranger. At precisely 3:02 a.m., it was Jolene's hand that Camille held as her heart ceased to beat. At 3:02 a.m., Darnell's hand was firmly clasped around a Montblanc fountain pen, valued at $900, pressing ink onto paper destined to be forgotten by the subsequent fiscal quarter. The telephone rang at 3:04 a.m. Darnell answered on the second resonance. His entire being seemed to freeze. The pen slipped from his grasp, tumbling across the $45,000 expanse of mahogany before impacting the floor with an unhearable thud. He arrived at the hospital at 3:51 a.m., 39 minutes past the point of no return. Camille had already been attended to. The life-sustaining machinery had been silenced. The room carried the scent of antiseptic, the delicate fragrance of lavender, and something else, something definitive, akin to the air after a candle has been extinguished. In the hallway, a nurse occupied a molded plastic chair, her uniform rumpled, her head bowed, her shoulders convulsing with a silent, profound grief that had exhausted all outward expression. She had been present for hours. She had sung, braided hair, held hands, listened, and stayed. Darnell proceeded past her, the sharp click of his shoes echoing on the linoleum. His gaze was fixed solely on the door. His mind was already fracturing, desperately attempting to reassemble itself around a reality devoid of Camille's presence. He walked by the solitary individual who had been there when he should have been, and he never looked back. The months that followed Camille's passing did not shatter Jolene in a singular cataclysmic event. Rather, they dismantled her incrementally, akin to the persistent erosion of stone by water, a process so gradual and imperceptible that the entire foundation eventually crumbled. She returned to her professional duties a mere 3 days after the funeral. There was no alternative. The monthly rent amounted to $1,700. Nico required school supplies. Marie's blood pressure medication cost $240 for each refill. Grief was a luxury Jolene could ill afford. However, the damage had already begun its insidious work. Sleep became an elusive commodity. Each time she closed her eyes, the spectral beeping of the monitors would reverberate in her mind, followed by the profound silence that descended once the beep ceased. She would hear Camille's voice, that final, faint whisper, the words she had pledged to safeguard but found herself unable to relinquish. Her hands began to tremble during procedures requiring blood draws. Her concentration would waver mid-shift. On occasion, she would find herself standing in the medication room, syringe in hand, momentarily disoriented for 3 to 4 seconds, a temporal void that felt akin to plunging into an abyss. 8 months subsequent to Camille's demise, Jolene committed an error. She miscalculated a dosage, entering 4 milligrams instead of 0.4 on a pain management chart. Fortunately, the patient sustained no adverse effects, as the discrepancy was detected by a vigilant pharmacist prior to administration. Nevertheless, an incident report was meticulously filed. The review board convened, and Mount Sinai, the very institution where Jolene had held the hand of a dying woman through the most harrowing night of both their lives, terminated her employment with immediate effect. No severance package was offered, nor was a letter of recommendation provided. Her nursing license was subjected to temporary suspension, rendering her ineligible to even apply for reinstatement for 18 months. The official rationale cited was negligence. The term that should have been employed was sheer exhaustion. 3 months after her dismissal, Marie suffered a stroke. She survived the ordeal, but the left side of her body lost its functionality. She was no longer capable of cooking, ascending stairs, or adequately supervising Nico while Jolene sought new employment. The attending physician deemed that Marie required round-the-clock care. Jolene located a nursing facility in Queens with a monthly cost of $4,200. Her savings account contained a meager $2,340. The financial equation simply did not compute. For individuals like Jolene, the numbers rarely aligned. She began to divest herself of her possessions, selling the couch, the kitchen table, Nico's bicycle, the vibrant blue one with the chime that produced a cheerful melody when squeezed. Nico wept as she carried it out, but then he wiped his eyes and declared it was perfectly fine, as he was outgrowing it anyway. He was 7 years old. The apartment followed soon after. Missed rent payments, followed by further omissions. The landlord initiated eviction proceedings on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Jolene and Nico stood in the intake queue at a family shelter situated on West 95th Street, their sole possessions contained within 2 suitcases and a backpack fashioned in the likeness of a dinosaur. Nico gazed upwards at the stark fluorescent lighting, the unadorned cinder block walls, and the rows of cots partitioned by hanging fabric sheets. "Mama," he inquired, "is this like a sleepover?" Jolene swallowed a sharp, lodged sensation in the back of her throat. "Yes, baby," she responded, her voice strained. "A very, very long sleepover." She commenced her days at 4 in the morning, venturing to the wholesale flower market in Chelsea. Roses, tulips, daisies, whatever proved most economical, On that particular day, she would artfully bundle them into small bouquets, fill a plastic bucket with water, and transport them via subway to a corner near Central Park at 72nd and Columbus. She would then sell them for prices ranging from $5 to $7 each. On a propitious day, her earnings would reach $19. On an unfavorable day, a mere $8. During inclement weather, she would garner nothing. Nico would sit beside her on an overturned milk crate, diligently completing his homework upon a flattened cardboard box. His pencils were arranged in neat rows, a testament to Jolene's teaching. Even when the world seemingly disintegrated, one must maintain order amongst one's belongings. Their midday sustenance, costing $7.50, consisted of 2 sandwiches and a bottle of water procured from the local bodega. They shared the water. 14 blocks to the south, Darnell Okafor was seated alone at a secluded corner table in Per Se. The tasting menu alone carried a price tag of $350 per person. He ordered wine, which he did not consume. He observed the flickering candlelight. His thoughts drifted, encompassing both the profound emptiness and the overwhelming fullness of existence. His gaze fixated on the unoccupied chair that he still found himself incapable of pushing inward. 2 individuals, separated by 14 blocks and 2 years of profound silence. One person, submerged in an ocean of affluence. The other, gasping for air in its stark absence. Neither was aware that the other continued to bear the immense weight of the same singular night, the same confined space, the same final exhalation that had irrevocably reshaped both their destinies. Darnell Okafor made the decision to traverse the city on foot. It marked the 2nd anniversary of Camille's passing. For reasons that eluded his comprehension, he felt no desire for the familiar comfort of his vehicle, the supple leather seating, the tinted windows, the unobtrusive silence of a driver programmed for discretion. He yearned for the tangible sensation of pavement beneath his feet. He craved the city's vibrant cacophony. He desired to experience the metropolis as Camille had cherished it, loud, unyielding, and brimming with life. The late afternoon sun, slicing diagonally through the canyons formed by the towering buildings along Central Park West, cast elongated bars of golden light across the pedestrian thoroughfare. Traffic moved at a glacial pace. The enticing aroma of a steaming pretzel cart mingled with exhaust fumes and the crisp air of early spring emanating from a corner stand at 72nd Street. Delicate nascent leaves, barely green, clung precariously to the branches above the park's perimeter wall, as if still contemplating whether to fully embrace the burgeoning season. Darnell walked southward. His coat, a luxurious cashmere, exuded understated elegance. His footwear, crafted in Italy, spoke of refined taste. His consciousness, however, remained tethered to a hospital room, 1,000 miles and 2 years in his past. He had a sudden, compelling need for flowers, white peonies, Camille's absolute favorite. She used to procure them every Saturday from a modest bodega in Harlem during their early years, a time of shared financial constraint and a cramped studio apartment where the radiator's persistent clanking mimicked the rhythm of a beating heart. She would arrange them herself, always in the same distinctive manner. White peonies. A single sprig of lavender placed diagonally on the left side, nestled amongst the stems at an angle that defied conventional logic, yet held a unique significance known only to her. He spotted the makeshift flower stall from a considerable distance. A utilitarian plastic bucket rested on the sidewalk, filled with bundles of roses, tulips, and daisies, each artfully encased in cellophane and newspaper. A woman sat behind the display, her jacket appearing thin for the month of March. Her hands, noticeably rough and reddened, betrayed the manual labor involved. Adjacent to her, a young boy, appearing to be around 7 or 8 years old, lay propped on his stomach atop a flattened cardboard box, engrossed in drawing with colored pencils worn down to mere stubs. Darnell halted his progression. "How much for the peonies?" he inquired. $7, sir." "Just the peonies. Nothing else." Without looking up, she reached into the bucket, her fingers moving with practiced swiftness, deftly selecting stems and gently shaking off excess water. She then proceeded to wrap them in brown paper, and then she performed an action that defied his immediate understanding. Reaching into a small jar situated beside her crate, she extracted a solitary sprig of lavender and tucked it into the bouquet. Positioned on the left side, crossed over the stems. Darnell accepted the flowers, proffering a $50 bill. "Keep it." She began to protest, looking up. Their gazes met. Jolene's hands stilled. Her lips parted slightly. The color drained from her face as if a tide were rapidly receding. She recognized him instantly, unequivocally, with the visceral clarity of a body recalling a traffic accident long after the shattered glass has been cleared. Darnell, however, did not recognize her. He turned to depart, taking 2 steps, then a third. The subtle aroma of lavender reached him first, not its visual presence but its scent. It stirred something profound within his chest, a sensation resonating deeper than language, surpassing conscious thought. He was transported to a kitchen counter in Harlem, a nightstand in his opulent penthouse, a windowsill where Camille once stood barefoot, arranging flowers while humming a melody he could never quite identify. He glanced down at the bouquet, the lavender positioned on the left side, crossing over the stems. He had witnessed this precise arrangement countless times. No professional florist employed such a method, nor could it be found in any floral shop or online tutorial. This was unequivocally Camille's unique style, her personal innovation, her quiet, private ritual that she had never elaborated upon to anyone, perhaps save for the individual who had observed her most intimately during those final, precious days. Darnell slowly turned back. The woman was fixedly observing him. Her eyes were moist, yet held a remarkable steadiness. She was not actively weeping. She maintained a perfect stillness, the kind of composure one adopts when any movement risks shattering something irretrievably broken. "The lavender," Darnell's voice emerged, low and almost a whisper. "You placed it on the left side, crossing over the stems." She remained silent. "How did you know she preferred it that way?" A profound silence ensued. The young boy looked up from his drawing, his brown eyes conveying a mixture of curiosity and an utter absence of apprehension. "Mama, do you know this man?" Jolene's hand instinctively found the boy's shoulder, a protective primal gesture. "Yes, baby. I knew his wife." The word struck Darnell with the force of a velvet-wrapped fist. Wife. The present tense had been abruptly shifted to the past in another's utterance, and it still inflicted a sharp pang every single time. He looked at Jolene. Truly looked. Beyond the thin jacket, the chapped hands, and the weariness etched into every line of her face. He surveyed the plastic bucket, the flattened cardboard box, the nubs of colored pencils, the boy diligently completing his studies on a public sidewalk due to a lack of any other suitable space. And then the memory surfaced. Not her face. Her hands. Hands clasped around Camille's fingers in a hospital bed. Hands that were present at 3:01 a.m. while his were occupied by a pen. The very same hands, now red and fissured from thorns, from cold water, and from the arduous labor of 14-hour days spent selling $7 bouquets on a Manhattan sidewalk. Something shifted within his chest, beneath his ribs. It was not the familiar ache of pain, nor the pervasive burden of grief. It was something sharper, something far more profound. Shame. Darnell did not retreat. He lowered his gaze to the sidewalk, noting its grimy, gum-stained, cracked surface. Nevertheless, he proceeded to sit down upon it, his $5,200 Tom Ford suit pressed against concrete that had not seen cleaning since the winter months. His knees popped audibly, and his back protested the unnatural position. He was indifferent. He sat beside the bucket of flowers like a man who had lost the faculty for standing in the world he had meticulously constructed, now attempting to relearn how to occupy someone else's. "You were there." Darnell's voice was quiet. "That last night." Jolene's jaw tightened perceptibly. "Yes." "I arrived too late," By the time I got there, she was already gone. And you were in the hallway, sitting on that plastic chair. I walked right past you. I remember, Jolene responded softly. I didn't even ask your name. You seemed preoccupied. That's no justification, however. Darnell's voice cracked, a sound like a perpetually slammed door. It's still no excuse. A taxi blared its horn 3 times in quick succession. Nico turned a page in his notepad. A single yellow rose petal detached itself and fluttered to the sidewalk between them. I need to understand what transpired, Darnell stated. After that evening, with you, how did you end up in this situation? Jolene tensed. I'm doing all right, Mr. Okafor. We are both doing all right. You're selling blossoms in March without gloves, and your son is completing arithmetic on cardboard. That is not all right. I'm not intending to be unkind. I'm saying this because I was absent that night, and you were present, and I believe I owe you at least the honest account of what occurred. Jolene gazed at the flower receptacle for an extended duration. I relinquished my post at the hospital, she eventually declared. An error was made on a patient's chart. I was dismissed. Then my mother became unwell. A stroke. She requires constant attention now. The expenses mounted faster than I could manage. We lost our residence. We've been at the shelter on 95th Street when there's space available. This, she indicated the flowers, is what I can manage presently. It's honest work. Nico eats every day. We are surviving. She spoke with the dispassionate tone of soldiers recounting a skirmish. Measured. Factual. No allowance for sympathy, because sympathy was a luxury she had excised from her existence, much like she had removed everything else that wasn't essential. Darnell absorbed her words, but he also perceived what remained unsaid. She omitted the reason for her dismissal. She made no connection to Camille. She carried that fragment of the narrative like a concealed weight in her pocket, heavy and secret. He felt the urge to inquire. He almost did. Instead, he posed the question that had resided in his core for 730 days. Finally, did she utter anything? The atmosphere between them shifted. A tension arose, something ancient and sacred and delicate. Jolene's eyes fluttered shut for a brief moment. When they reopened, they were firm, yet brimming with emotion. She did say something, Jolene responded with caution. But it wasn't mine to bear. It was intended for you, and I don't believe a sidewalk is the appropriate venue. Darnell's throat constricted. Camille's voice echoed in his mind once more. Closer now. Clearer. Like a distant call from the end of a long corridor, yet still too far to discern the words. Nico tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mama, this one is broken. He held up a daisy with a bent stalk, its petals drooping, but still pristine white. Then he turned to Darnell and extended it with profound sincerity. It's broken, but it still smells nice. You can have it. Darnell accepted the bloom. His hand trembled. Thank you, he murmured, his voice rough, unraveled. He looked at Jolene. Permit me to assist. Please, whatever you require. Jolene shook her head immediately. I didn't remain with your wife so you would be indebted to me, Mr. Okafor. I stayed because she needed companionship. That's what nurses do. That's what people do. I don't seek your financial aid. I don't desire a debt settled. I simply wish to sell my flowers and care for my son. Darnell studied her expression. There was an unyielding dignity etched there, formidable and unbroken, much like he had once witnessed in Camille's eyes when the physicians informed her the treatment was ineffective and she had merely nodded and inquired about the dinner hour. He stood, brushed the dust from his trousers, and surveyed the flower bucket. How many arrangements do you have remaining? Jolene blinked. Perhaps 30. I will acquire all of them. Mr. Okafor, that represents $180 worth of flowers. You have no need for 30 arrangements. This isn't charity. Darnell retrieved his wallet. Camille adored blossoms of every variety. Consider this my purchase on her behalf. Jolene opened her mouth, then closed it. She glanced at Nico, who was observing the exchange with wide, attentive eyes. She accepted the money. Darnell gathered the bouquets, roses and tulips and daisies and peonies, cascading over his cashmere sleeves, water dripping onto his shoes, petals dancing in the March breeze. He cut a ridiculous figure. He was aware of it. A magnate standing on a Manhattan pavement clutching 30 assortments of bodega-quality flowers like a man who had just proposed to an entire metropolis. He had no notion where to deposit them, but one certainty resonated within him. He would return. Day 3. Tulips and an acknowledgement. Darnell arrived at 72nd Street in Columbus at precisely 8:30 in the morning, the earliest he could depart the residence without his assistant noticing. Jolene was already present. She had been there since 5:30, enduring 3 hours on her feet before he had even awoken. He purchased a dozen tulips. She wrapped them in silence. He offered a thank you. She replied, "Have a pleasant day." He walked 12 blocks northward and placed them in a vase on the dining table. The initial floral display in that penthouse in 2 years. Day 7. Sunflowers and an inquiry. "How is your son progressing at school?" Jolene paused mid-wrapping. Her gaze narrowed slightly, a characteristic expression when unexpected kindness appears and one needs a moment to ascertain its authenticity. "He's doing adequately. He enjoys mathematics, dislikes reading aloud. His teacher describes him as intelligent yet reserved." "Quiet isn't a flaw," Darnell commented. "I was a quiet child." "You don't strike me as quiet." "I've learned to simulate." She almost offered a smile. Almost. Day 9. Darnell observed the passage of time. Jolene arrived at the street corner at 5:30 in the morning. She transported the flower bucket from the subway, traversing 3 lines with a change, as she couldn't afford a taxi. She remained there until 7 in the evening. 13.5 hours on the pavement in footwear that had undergone 2 resoles. $19 on a prosperous day. Day 11. Roses and an unforeseen moment. Nico presented Darnell with a drawing he had completed during school hours. A dwelling with a crimson door, a garden, and a canine companion. "Mama says we can't have a dog at this moment," Nico explained. "But when we acquire a house, I shall christen him Biscuit." "Why Biscuit?" "Because biscuits bring joy to everyone." Darnell chuckled. He genuinely laughed. The sound emerged raspy and hesitant, akin to a machine sputtering to life after years of disuse. Jolene regarded him, then she too emitted a laugh, brief and surprised, as if she had forgotten its existence. It caught them both unexpectedly. Day 14. Darnell noticed the footwear. Nico wore sneakers that had once been white. The sole was detaching from the toe of the left shoe. A rubber band secured it. A schoolyard peer had apparently pointed it out, disparaging them as trash shoes. Nico related the incident to his mother on their walk home. Jolene's expression became taut, restrained, the kind of tightness that arises when a parent harbors a silent fury at a world that penalizes their child for poverty, a rage suppressed because there is no immediate recourse that a $7 bouquet can rectify. However, Nico shrugged. "I like my shoes," he declared. "Mama purchased them with flour earnings." Darnell heard those words, and a fissure formed within his chest along a fault line that had been widening for 2 weeks. 14 days later. Nico succumbed to sleep at 6 in the evening, slumped over his cardboard makeshift desk, his cheek resting against an unfinished mathematics worksheet. His pencil rolled from the edge, landing in a small puddle. Jolene retrieved it, wiped it on her sleeve, and placed it back beside his hand. She did not rouse him. She simply adjusted his hood and continued to vent flowers. Day 18. A gentle rain, a cold drizzle that darkened the pavement and lent it the hue of stale dishwater. Jolene was absent. Darnell arrived at the corner at 8:45. The spot was vacant. No bucket, no crate, no Nico, no cardboard, only damp concrete and a trickling gray gutter. He stood there. He remained there for 25 minutes. His suit jacket became saturated, his shoes filled with water, his phone buzzed 11 times. He answered none of them. As he finally turned and walked home, dripping through the opulent lobby of his building, past a doorman who stared but remained silent, he identified the sensation in his chest. It was concern. Not the kind of concern he experienced when a transaction was faltering, not the boardroom variety, the numerical kind, the quarterly projection kind. This was different. This was more primal, more human, the kind of worry that settles in the pit of one's stomach and whispers, "What if something occurred and you weren't present?" He had not experienced that specific brand of anxiety since the evening the physician delivered Camille's final scan results, and standing in his penthouse, water pooling on the marble floor, surrounded by 14 days' worth of flowers he had acquired from a woman he was only beginning to comprehend, Darnell Okafor grasped a truth he had deliberately avoided for 2 years. He was not returning to that street corner for floral acquisitions. He was returning because, for the first time since Camille's passing, someone required his presence, and for the first time in his existence, being present was his sole desire. Darnell located the shelter with the assistance of the front desk coordinator, a woman named Paulette, who recognized his name and countenance and made a conspicuous effort not to gaze at his watch as she guided him down a corridor permeated with the scent of industrial cleanser and boiled vegetables. The family wing was situated on the second floor. 6 beds per cubicle, metal frames secured to the floor, thin mattresses encased in vinyl that emitted a squeak with every movement, a single window per room, sealed shut with paint, and a plastic receptacle beneath each bed for personal effects. That comprised the entirety of it. Darnell stood in the doorway of room 2B and felt his lungs constrict. Jolene was reclining on the lower bunk closest to the wall. Her face was flushed. Her respiration was shallow and labored. A damp washcloth rested folded on her forehead, placed there by hands too small to belong to anyone but Nico. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor adjacent to her bed. He had an open coloring book before him, but was not coloring. He was observing his mother's breathing, meticulously counting the intervals between each inhalation, much like a child does when frightened, but lacking the vocabulary to articulate it. On the pillow beside Jolene's head, Nico's clothing was meticulously folded into a perfect square. 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, undergarments, and socks rolled into compact squares. Everything was immaculate. Everything was precise, the kind of order that manifests solely when the individual maintaining it possesses no other elements within their dominion, and atop the folded attire, a sandwich nestled within a Ziploc bag, peanut butter on white bread cut diagonally, a small apple quartered, and a handwritten inscription on a torn segment of notebook paper. Darnell lifted the note. 5 words penned in pencil. The letters trembled subtly at their edges. "You are my brave boy." She had prepared his midday meal. She was burning with fever on a vinyl mattress in a room shared with 5 strangers, and at some point she had roused herself to prepare her son a sandwich, slice an apple, and pen him a message so he wouldn't feel apprehensive. Darnell's hand quivered. He returned the note to its original position. "Mr. Darnell," Nico's voice, small and steady. Not precisely fearful, but cautious, the tone a child adopts when they've learned that adults don't invariably resolve matters. "Hey, buddy, is your mom asleep?" "She's hot. I keep putting the cold cloth on her head like she does when I'm unwell, but she keeps talking in her sleep. She says peculiar things." "What sort of things?" Nico looked toward his mother. His jaw tightened in a manner no 8-year-olds should possess the capacity for. "She keeps mentioning a lady's name and apologizing. She keeps saying, 'Sorry.'" Darnell retrieved a plastic chair from the corner and sat beside Jolene's bed. The chair swayed precariously. One leg was shorter than the others. From some distance down the corridor, a baby cried. A door slammed. A television blared too loudly through the thin walls. Jolene stirred. Her lips moved. "I couldn't sleep after Mrs. Okafor." Her voice was faint, fractured. The words emerged in disjointed fragments, dredged from some place beneath the fever. "I kept seeing her face every time I closed my eyes. Her face, her hands." Darnell leaned closer. "I made an error because I was excessively fatigued. I couldn't cease seeing her. I couldn't cease hearing the monitors. They dismissed me because I couldn't stop caring. They cited negligence, but I wasn't negligent. I was utterly exhausted. I was broken. I remained in that room. I never departed that room. The words struck Darnell with the force of a door ripped open by a tempest. She hadn't lost her employment due to carelessness. She hadn't committed an error due to incompetence. She had disintegrated from the overwhelming burden of having given too much of herself to a dying woman in a hospital bed, a woman named Camille Okafor, and the institution that employed her lacked any framework for such profound distress. The sequence of events was clear, brutal, and unbroken. Jolene remained with Camille. Jolene absorbed the trauma of witnessing her demise. Jolene could not sleep. Jolene's hands trembled. Jolene miscalculated a dosage. Jolene was terminated. Jolene lost her livelihood. Jolene's mother suffered a stroke. Jolene lost her home. Jolene ended up on a sidewalk selling flowers because she had cared too deeply, because she had stayed, because she had done what Darnell ought to have done. Camille's voice surged within his consciousness, more potent now, urgent, not words yet, just a sound, a pressure, like someone pounding insistently on a door from within. Darnell reached out and clasped Jolene's hand. Her fingers were searingly hot, rough, cracked at the knuckles, the same fingers that had braided Camille's hair and held her hand during her final hour and arranged lavender and peonies on a sidewalk. 2 years later, he sat there in a wobbly plastic chair in a room that reeked of bleach and despair, holding the hand of a woman who had forfeited everything because she had loved his wife more than her profession demanded. If this narrative has reached you, please take a moment to subscribe and share it. Now let us continue. For the first time, the billionaire occupied the opposing side of that bedside, not the one with financial resources, not the one wielding authority, but the one who could offer nothing more than to sit and hold on, hoping it sufficed. And he apprehended a truth that no amount of affluence had ever imparted to him. Helplessness was not characterized by a lack of funds. It was defined by arriving too late. Darnell made several phone calls from the shelter's hallway while Nico slept soundly on the floor beside his mother's bed, his small hand resting on her arm like an anchor. The initial call was placed to a healthcare attorney named Claudia Reese. $38,000 in legal fees. Darnell authorized it without hesitation. Jolene's professional history prior to the incident was unblemished. 9 years, 0 complaints, numerous commendations. The dosage error had been classified as negligence, but the medical evidence strongly indicated burnout resulting from prolonged exposure to trauma. Claudia expressed optimism regarding Jolene's prospects for reinstatement, deeming them strong, though not guaranteed. The second call was directed to a property manager in Washington Heights. A 2-bedroom apartment, 3rd floor, a well-maintained building, a secure block in close proximity to a bus route that serviced Mount Sinai directly and near a public school offering an after-school STEM program free of charge for eligible families. $2,600 per month. Darnell paid 6 months in advance. The third call was made to a nursing facility on the Upper West Side. $5,100 per month. Improved staff-to-resident ratios, an enhanced physical therapy program, and a garden where residents could relax in the afternoon. He arranged for Marie's transfer by the close of the week. The fourth call was to Nico's new educational institution. He confirmed enrollment, inquired about the after-school program, and asked if counseling services were available. They were. He made a mental note to follow up. He did not solicit Jolene's consent. He understood her anticipated response. When Jolene awoke 2 days later, the fever had subsided, her body still weak, but her mind lucid. It was Nico who informed her. Not Darnell. Darnell had not returned since the night at the shelter. He had conveyed his instructions through Paulette and channeled everything via intermediaries. However, the documentation was situated on the plastic chair beside her bed. Apartment lease, school enrollment confirmation, legal retainer agreement, nursing home transfer authorization, all duly signed, fully paid, and in her name. Jolene perused every document, slowly, meticulously, in the manner of someone scrutinizing a contract after learning that the fine print conceals the pitfalls. Subsequently, she retrieved the telephone and dialed the sole number listed on the contact sheet. Darnell answered on the second ring. "Who granted you the authority?" Jolene's voice was low, controlled, yet her tone betrayed a tremor. I am not a project, Mr. Okafor. I am not an absolution for your guilt. I am not some broken artifact you can mend to alleviate your own sleepless nights. I did not remain with your wife so you could rescue me and feel superior. Darnell remained silent. She continued, I've been self-sufficient and providing for my son for 8 years, entirely alone. No paternal figure, no familial support, no safety net. I have worked double shifts, foregone meals, slept on floors, and hawked blossoms in the frigid air for $7 a bunch. I accomplished that. I did not solicit assistance, not from the hospital, not from the municipality, not from you. Do you comprehend? I understand, Darnell responded softly. Then why did you undertake this without consulting me? Because you would have refused. That is your prerogative. Yes, it is. Silence. Prolonged. Heavy. A siren wailed in the distance beyond the shelter window. Nico appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. Mama, why are you raising your voice? Jolene's demeanor shifted instantaneously. The anger retreated inward, concealed behind the maternal facet that invariably took precedence. I'm not raising my voice, darling. I'm merely conversing. Go finish your drawing, all right? Nico departed, slowly casting 2 backward glances. Jolene returned to the phone. Her voice was softer now, strained. Darnell spoke before she could. You are correct in all respects. This is not about assuaging my conscience, as nothing will achieve that. Camille is gone. She will not return. No apartment, no legal representative, no amount of wealth can alter that fact. However, she would have been alone on that final night if you had not stayed. She would have passed without a hand to hold. That was meant to be my role. I was supposed to be there. And I wasn't. I was in a conference room signing a document I can no longer recall. I failed the only individual who ever held significance for me. The least I can do, the absolute minimum, is to avoid failing a second time. Jolene was silent for a considerable period. This does not rectify what transpired, she finally stated. No, it does not. And I owe you no gratitude. No, you do not. And if I accept this, it is not for myself. It is for Nico. Everything I have ever done has been for him. I know, Darnell affirmed. I witnessed it in the sandwich, in the note you penned, in the meticulous way you fold his clothes when you can barely stand. Jolene's breath hitched. And for your wife, she inquired, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. She implored me to look after him. I cannot fulfill that commitment from a shelter. Darnell's chest tightened. She asked me to take care of him. The words fell like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples outward in directions he could not yet fathom. He did not inquire about Camille's words. Not yet. Not under these circumstances. But their shape was beginning to emerge, gradually, like a photograph developing in the darkness. All right, Jolene conceded. For Nico, solely for Nico, and when I regain my license, I will repay you every last cent. Darnell closed his eyes. Agreed. The apartment emanated the scent of fresh paint and new carpeting, and that peculiar sort of void that characterizes an unoccupied space. A clean void, anticipating occupancy. Jolene stood at the threshold. She did not step inside. Her hand rested on the doorframe, her fingers pressing into the wood as if testing its solidity, its capacity to bear weight, whether the floor would give way if she placed her trust in it. Nico exhibited no such reservation. He surged past her like a horse bolting from a gate, his sneakers squeaking on the laminate flooring, his backpack bouncing against his shoulder blades. He made a beeline for the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, closed it, and opened it again. Mama, it's cold inside. That's how refrigerators function, sweetie. I know, but it works. It genuinely works. He dashed to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, turned it off, then on again. Hot water, Mama. Then the light switch. On, off, on, off, on. Mama, the light operates when I press it. Jolene's hand remained on the doorframe. Her knuckles had turned white. Darnell stood in the hallway behind her, a carton of kitchen essentials he'd procured that very morning clutched in his hands. Plates, cups, a complete set of eating implements, dishwashing liquid, paper napkins, minor items, unremarkable things, possessions that cost next to nothing, yet signified the world when one had been subsisting on disposable dinnerware in a sanctuary for the better portion of a year. "These are yours," he stated softly, with no stipulations. Jolene took a single step across the threshold, then another. Her movements were akin to someone navigating a dwelling within a dream, her fingers brushing the walls, the counter surface, the drapes already in place. She opened a cupboard, vacant, awaiting occupancy. She activated the kitchen tap and let the water stream over her hands, simply standing there, absorbing its sensation. Hot water readily available in her personal kitchen, in her very own dwelling. She had been without readily available hot water for 11 months. Darnell occupied the afternoon assembling furnishings, a bedstead for Nico, a shelving unit constructed from a flat-pack container accompanied by 37 fasteners and incomprehensible assembly directions, and a modest workstation for academic pursuits. Nico assumed the role of overseer. He fashioned a protective head covering from a cardboard receptacle, inscribed "Boss" upon it with a red marking pen, and insisted that Darnell also don one. "Prudence above all, Mr. Darnell." Darnell affixed the cardboard headwear. It perched askew upon his scalp, too diminutive, utterly comical. He hadn't experienced such a bout of laughter since the time of Camille. Jolene commenced her program for recovery from exhaustion the subsequent Monday, 3 sessions weekly, cognitive behavioral therapy, group discourse with fellow healthcare professionals who had encountered burnout due to overwhelming empathy, mandatory, non-negotiable. The state licensing board stipulated these requirements for the restoration of her professional credentials. She attended every session punctually, arriving early and departing late. She approached this endeavor with the same methodical discipline and silent, resolute determination that characterized a woman who had resolved that succumbing to despair was not an option. Nico began his tenure at his new educational establishment on a Wednesday. He returned home bearing a consent form for the after-school program focusing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, along with a sketch of a robotic contraption he had conceived. The robot, christened Helper, was designed to perform domestic chores, prepare meals, and possess inexhaustible energy. On Friday, Nico arrived home with an additional item, a handwritten invitation to a birthday celebration extended by a young gentleman named Deshawn. It was enclosed in a cerulean envelope adorned with dinosaur decals near the seal. Jolene unfolded it at the kitchen table, perused its contents twice, then set it down, placing both hands flat upon the surface. Subsequently, she wept. Not the measured weeping she had trained herself to perform in the shelter. Silent, fleeting, efficient. Genuine tears emanating from a profound ancient depth, a reservoir filled with every instant she had maintained composure because her child was observing and she could not afford to fracture. Nico stood beside her, visibly concerned. "Mama, it's merely a party." "I understand, my dear. I do. These are tears of joy." She dried her face, offered a smile, and drew him near. And this was the inaugural birthday party invitation Nico had received since their displacement from their dwelling, the initial instance another child had expressed, "I desire your presence." That evening, after Nico had succumbed to slumber in his own bed, within his own room, upon a cot that did not emit a metallic squeak, nor was shared with strangers, Jolene and Darnell stood in the compact kitchen. Jolene heated water in a kettle discovered within a cabinet, poured 2 cups of tea, and presented one to Darnell. They stood in contemplative silence for a duration, attuning to the settling sounds of the building, the clicking on of the radiator, the distant hum of traffic, and that peculiar quietude unique to a newly established, secure, and personal abode. "I continually anticipate awakening back at the sanctuary," Jolene confessed. "That will not transpire," Darnell reassured her. "This dwelling is unequivocally yours." Another period of silence ensued. Steam ascended from the mugs. The refrigerator emitted a gentle hum. Camille, would have found this agreeable, Jolene remarked softly. Knowing you accomplished this, she would have appreciated it. Darnell swallowed with difficulty, his throat constricting, as it invariably did when her name was spoken aloud. She would have wished to know you acted as you did, he conveyed. That night, and every night preceding it, Jolene contemplated her tea, cradling the cup with both hands. Her gaze was moist, yet steady. She was remarkably easy to cherish, Mr. Okafor. That is the aspect they omit to mention regarding that profession. Those nearing their end at times are the simplest to embrace, and that is what truly undoes you. Darnell inclined his head. He refrained from speaking, uncertain of his composure. Somewhere within his chest, amidst the sorrow, the remorse, and the quiet contentment of occupying a kitchen redolent of fresh paint and peppermint tea, Camille's voice stirred anew. It possessed a newfound clarity, close enough to perceive, as if someone were positioned just outside a door, awaiting admittance, but not yet. Not presently. 3 months subsequent, the apartment was perfumed with jollof rice and an unidentified sweet fried confection that Darnell had come to adore. Jolene's signature dish, pork shoulder, marinated in citrus and Scotch bonnet peppers, fried to a dark, crisp finish. She prepared it every Friday now, Nico's most cherished meal. Darnell contributed the rice, prepared according to his mother's time-honored recipe, tomato paste, habanero, smoked paprika, bay leaves, and a patience he found lacking for any other aspect of his existence. They partook of the meal at the kitchen table, all three of them. Nico recounted his science project, a volcanic eruption simulated with baking soda and vinegar. Deshawn had been his collaborator. They achieved a grade of B+. Nico believed their endeavor merited an A, though he conceded the eruption exhibited a slight inclination to the left. "It leaned due to your excessive use of vinegar, Mama," Jolene interjected. "It leaned because volcanoes are inherently unpredictable, Mother. That is their very essence." Darnell smiled. He ate. He listened. He existed within an environment where discussions revolved around baking soda volcanoes, B+ marks, and leftover sustenance, and for the first time in over 2 years, the silence within his core ceased its clamor. Following the repast, Nico dozed off on the sofa. Jolene transported him to his bed, arranged the covers around his shoulders, bestowed a kiss upon his forehead, and left the door ajar, as he preferred the ambient light from the hallway. She rejoined Darnell in the kitchen, who was engaged in washing dishes. Jolene retrieved a towel and began drying. They stood in close proximity for a while, the sounds of running water, the gentle clinking of plates, the ordinary operations of a life unfolding. Jolene then set the towel aside. "I believe the moment has arrived," she stated. Darnell turned off the faucet. He comprehended her meaning implicitly. He had sensed this juncture approaching for weeks, feeling its imminence akin to the palpable premonition of an impending storm, not in the skies above, but deep within his very being. Jolene took a seat at the table. Darnell occupied the chair opposite her. The kitchen luminescence hummed overhead. The refrigerator emitted a soft click. The edifice settled around them. "That final night," Jolene began, her voice measured and deliberate, each word placed with the caution of stepping on ice. "Your wife stirred around 2 in the morning. She had been asleep for many hours. The morphine dosage was substantial. I had not anticipated her regaining consciousness, yet she did. She met my gaze, and her mind was lucid, truly lucid, as if the veil of confusion had lifted just long enough for her to impart what she needed to convey." Jolene paused, her hands clasped on the table. Her knuckles, though no longer chapped, still bore the imprint of the ordeal. She conveyed, "Tell Darnell something for me." Darnell ceased breathing. She said, "Tell him not to let wealth overshadow his capacity for love." The words descended into the kitchen like stones hurled from a great altitude. "Instruct him to seek out someone who requires him, not his fortune, not his lineage, merely him." Jolene's voice wavered, yet remained resolute. "Inform him that grief is not a testament to devotion. To live is." Darnell's palms rested flat on the table. His jaw was rigidly set. His eyes were open, yet his vision did not register the kitchen surroundings. Instead, he perceived a hospital room, a bed, a woman aware of her impending demise, who, in her final breaths, did not bid farewell, but granted him liberation. Grief is not loyalty. To live is. The barrier he had erected for 2 years finally yielded, and her voice permeated the space, not as a spectral apparition, nor as a mere recollection, but as a sanctioned release, as clear as water, as warm as the hand that once caressed his cheek each morning, murmuring, "You'll be tardy, but my affection remains unwavering." Jolene dabbed at her eyes. She added one further statement, "Not to me, but to you." Darnell looked upward. She clasped my hand and uttered, "Take good care of yourself, my dear. Promise me you will not deplete yourself entirely." The profound irony lay between them, an irreparable void neither could mend. Camille had implored Jolene to safeguard herself, and Jolene had acted in direct opposition. She had surrendered everything: her sleep, her equilibrium, her career, her sanctuary. She had given until nothing remained, and the very system meant to support her had allowed her to falter. Darnell attempted to speak. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His throat had constricted, entirely sealed by an accumulation of 2 years' worth of repressed emotion. Then it broke. He wept. Not the controlled effusion, not the professional pretense where one tightens the jaw, blinks, and proceeds. This was the outpouring from the very bedrock of his being, from the subterranean levels of every loss he had deliberately ignored. Every morning he had poured cold coffee down the drain. Every night he had lain in darkness, feigning indifference to the deafening void on the other side of the bed. He wept for Camille, for the evening he had missed, for the words he had never heard, for the empty chair at the dining table, for the woman whose love had been so profound that she had expended her final breath urging him to persevere. Jolene remained motionless, allowing his catharsis. She comprehended the significance of the moment, having experienced similar emotional ruptures from the opposing perspective. She understood that the sole recourse was to remain present. A creaking sound. Tiny footsteps echoed on the hallway floor. Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway, clad in pajamas adorned with rockets. His eyes were half closed, still clouded with sleep. He did not inquire about the disturbance, nor did he utter a word. He walked towards Darnell, clambered into his lap, encircled the man's neck with his arms, and clung tightly. He carried the scent of soap, peanut butter, and an indefinable essence that Darnell had come to associate with tranquility, perhaps trust, or the unique warmth of a child who, without logic, condition, or explanation, has determined you are worthy of his embrace. Darnell reciprocated the embrace, burying his face in Nico's shoulder, his body racked with tremors. And in that kitchen, in that apartment, in that precise instant, Camille's voice subsided. Not in its entirety, but because it had finally been acknowledged. Grief is not loyalty. To live is. 1 year later, Darnell Okafor stood at a lectern in a grand ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria. 400 individuals comprised the audience: investors, hospital administrators, political figures, journalists, philanthropists adorned in evening attire and impeccably tailored suits, each holding champagne flutes, identification cards, and that characteristic expression of refined interest often seen at affluent charitable gatherings. Darnell was attired in a dark suit, sans tie. He had abandoned ties 6 months prior. Camille had always detested them, remarking they made him appear as though he were striving too earnestly to project an image of someone he was not. Behind him, a large screen displayed 5 words in stark white lettering against a black background: the Camille Okafor Foundation. He grasped the edges of the lectern, surveyed the assembled company, and then commenced speaking. "We celebrate physicians," he declared. "We erect monuments to generals and statesmen. We bestow names upon buildings in honor of chief executive officers and benefactors whose contributions are substantial enough to merit inscription on walls. But the nurse who clasps your mother's hand at 3 in the morning when no one else is present. The aide who attends to the aftermath of the most challenging hours of someone's most difficult day. The caregiver who absorbs your family's anguish so that you need not bear its full weight alone. We forget her name by the following morning. A hush fell over the room. This foundation owes its existence to the steadfastness of one nurse. One nurse remained by my wife's side on the night of her passing. She sang to her. She braided her hair. She stayed when all others departed, and the system that employed her penalized her for it. She forfeited her position. She lost her home. She relinquished everything, not due to any failing in her professional duties, but because she cared with an intensity that proved her undoing. And our established system possesses no protocol for such profound emotional expenditure. He paused. The Camille Okafor Foundation for Healthcare Workers will provide immediate financial assistance, mental health support, and legal advocacy for nurses, aides, and caregivers who have been emotionally depleted by the burden of tending to others. $12 million in initial funding. No elaborate application processes, no bureaucratic hurdles, no forms requiring you to prove the depth of your suffering to qualify for aid. Simply support extended with dignity to individuals who gave their all and received nothing in return. He directed his gaze to the front row. Jolene was seated there, attired in a navy blazer she had purchased with her inaugural salary from Mount Sinai, where she now served in patient advocacy, the same institution that had terminated her employment 2 years prior. Nico sat beside her, sporting a diminutive gray vest and new footwear. He was engrossed in sketching robots in a notebook, his perennial fascination. "And I wish to introduce the co-director of this foundation," Darnell announced, "because I do not require another executive. I do not require another consultant armed with a degree and a spreadsheet. I need an individual who has personally experienced these circumstances. Someone who understands the sensation of surrendering your entire being and witnessing the system effectively erase you. Jolene Baptiste?" Jolene rose. The assembly offered a round of applause. She did not wave. She did not offer the practiced smile typical of gala attendees. She stood erect, her hand resting on Nico's shoulder, and gave a single, deliberate nod, the acknowledgement of a woman who had earned her standing not through connections or qualifications, but through sheer resilience. Following the presentations, the exchanges of pleasantries, the photographic sessions, and the champagne toasts, Darnell located them outside near the fountain adorning the hotel's facade. Nico was tossing pennies into the water. "Mr. Darnell?" "Yes, my boy." "Does this signify that more mothers like mine will not need to sell flowers?" Darnell knelt to his level, adopting the posture he now consistently maintained with Nico. "That is precisely what it signifies, young man." Nico pondered this, then tilted his head. "Good, because Mama's flowers were beautiful, but she looks even lovelier when she isn't weary." Jolene placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. She turned away briefly, then faced them again, allowing the tears to flow freely. Darnell placed a hand on Nico's head, and for a fleeting moment, before a fountain filled with wishes and discarded coins, all was precisely as it should be. On a Sunday morning in early October, Darnell Okafor strolled through the Chelsea flower market, accompanied by a nurse and a 9-year-old boy. The market buzzed with activity. Vendors loudly proclaimed their prices, water splashed upon the pavement, and the air was fragrant with the scent of cut stems, damp earth, and something vibrantly verdant. Buckets of roses, orchids, and lilies lined the walkways, resembling a colorful procession. Jolene was intimately familiar with this place. She had frequented it during the pre-dawn hours. At 4 a.m, with chilled hands and empty stomach, she would purchase whatever was most affordable, cram bunches into a plastic container, and transport them via the subway to a street corner where she would stand for 13 hours, selling them for $7 each. Now she meandered through the same aisles in the daylight. Nico held her hand, pointing to everything. "Those are large," he exclaimed, indicating a bucket of sunflowers. "Would you like some? They always appear cheerful, even when it's raining." She bought him 3 sunflowers. He carried them aloft like a torch, their petals bobbing with each stride. Darnell located the white peonies. He requested a sprig of lavender from the vendor and tucked it into the arrangement himself, on the left side, crossing over the stems, precisely as Camille had preferred. They drove to the cemetery in Westchester. The journey was serene, windows down, the October air cool and crisp. Camille's headstone was understated, fashioned from white marble, bearing her name, birth, and death dates, and beneath them a line she had personally selected prior to her passing. I was here. I was loved. That was enough. Darnell placed the flowers down, white peonies and lavender. He knelt on the grass, pressing his palm flat against the cool stone. I heard you, he stated, his voice quiet and steady. Finally, Camille, I heard you. I am living. I found someone who needed me, not my wealth, not my name, but simply me. You were correct. You were invariably correct. Jolene stood behind him. She remained silent. She placed her hand lightly, firmly, and with presence upon his shoulder. Nico stepped forward. He carefully placed one sunflower upon the grave, handling it with the delicate reverence a child reserves for something precious. For Mrs. Camille, he declared. Mama said she was very kind. Darnell closed his eyes. The wind rustled through the trees. In the distance, a church bell chimed. The individuals who tend to us during our most profound adversities are seldom the ones we remember to support in return. Jolene Baptiste held the hand of a dying woman and lost everything. Darnell Okafor amassed an empire and lost the sole possession that truly mattered. However, when they rediscovered each other on a sidewalk encircled by blossoms, they unearthed something that no amount of wealth could procure, nor any measure of sorrow could annihilate. Kindness does not diminish. Debts of the heart bear no expiration dates. And the greatest asset that affluence can acquire is not comfort, but the opportunity to reciprocate what wealth could never quantify. Camille's final utterances were not a farewell. They constituted a guiding principle. Grief is not loyalty. And at long last, 2 years, 1,000 flowers, and one sidewalk later, they were all living. A billionaire, a nurse, and a young boy perambulating through a flower market on a Sunday morning, each bearing a bouquet, each carrying a second chance, each holding the quiet testament that love endures beyond all else, even death. Thank you for viewing. If this narrative resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe, share it with someone who might benefit from its message, and remember that those who care for us deserve our reciprocal care. We shall connect again in our next presentation.